The bell tower of Sacred Heart Seminary loomed over our village like a stone giant, its shadow stretching long and cold across the fields, even on the sunniest days. Its chimes, deep and mournful, marked the hours of my life, from my earliest. Memories of playing in the dusty lane to the endless afternoons I spent polishing brass in its echoing corridors. It was the year 1905, and I was 13, old enough to understand that some silences were louder than any sound. Sacred Heart wasn't just old, it felt ancient, as if the very stones held secrets. Built in the late 1700s, its Gothic arches and stained glass windows were perpetually dim, even when the sun beat down outside. The air inside always smelled of beeswax, old books, and something else, something indefinable. Perhaps the scent of countless whispered prayers, or maybe just dust and damp stone. I was an altar boy, which meant I spent more time within those walls than most, running errands for the priests, setting up for mass, and generally keeping out of the way. It was quiet work, mostly, but it taught me to observe. And what I observed, what I heard in hushed tones from the older sacristans and the nervous whispers of the younger priests, was a mystery that clung to the seminary like the persistent damp. 17. That was the number. 17 priests, gone over the past 15 years. Not all at once, mind you. One would vanish, then another a year or two later. Sometimes 3 years. It was never a sudden, dramatic disappearance. It was always quiet. A priest would be there one day, leading vespers, his voice echoing through the chapel. The next morning, his bed would be empty, his personal effects neatly arranged, his cassock hanging in the wardrobe. No note, no struggle, no sign. Just gone. The official explanation, delivered by Father Rector Bartholomew, a man whose voice was as booming as the seminary bell and whose face was as unyielding as granite, was always the same. Father, name, has been called to a higher service, a mission abroad, or has retired to a silent order for contemplation. But no letters ever came from these distant missions, no visits from these contemplative orders. And 17 was a lot of silent orders. Even I, a boy who spent most of his time thinking about fishing and the next meal, knew that. The latest disappearance had happened only a month ago. Father Michael. He was a kind priest, younger than most, with a gentle smile and a habit of humming folk tunes under his breath when he thought no one was listening. He was the one who would sometimes slip me an extra biscuit after breakfast, or let me read the adventure stories from the seminary library when I was done with my chores. He was supposed to lead morning prayers. But when the chapel bell chimed, for matins, Father Michael wasn't there. His room was empty. His books were stacked neatly by his bed. His rosary beads lay on his nightstand. Gone. Just like the others. I remember the morning after Father Michael vanished. The air in the seminary felt colder, heavier. The other priests moved with a subtle unease, their eyes darting, their conversations clipped. Father Rector Bartholomew delivered his usual explanation at breakfast, his voice booming, but even he couldn't quite mask the tension in the room. The younger priests looked pale, their eyes wide with a fear they tried to hide behind their prayer books. I saw Father Alaric, an old priest with a stoop and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries, staring out a window at the rain. He was the oldest priest in the seminary, and he had seen them all disappear. He noticed me polishing a candelabra nearby, and his gaze lingered. His eyes, usually clouded with age, held a sharp, knowing glint. He beckoned me closer with a gnarled finger. "Finn," he whispered, his voice raspy. "You have sharp eyes, boy. Sharper than most. You see things, don't you?" I nodded, clutching my polishing cloth. "I see that Father Michael is gone, Father." Father Alaric sighed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "Indeed, another one. They say higher service, but the only higher service I know of is to God. and God does not snatch men from their beds without a trace. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The others, they were all like him in a way. Quiet, observant, questioning. Questioning what, Father? I asked, my heart thumping. He looked around as if worried about unseen ears. The silence, Finn, the deep, deep silence of this place. And the whispers it tries to hide. He paused, then looked me directly in the eye. Be careful, Finn. Curiosity is a dangerous thing in these walls, especially when it touches upon what they wish to keep buried. He straightened up then, his moment of openness gone, replaced by his usual stoic demeanor. He walked away, leaving me alone with the polished brass and the chilling words, what they wish to keep buried. That conversation, more than Father Michael's disappearance, ignited something in me. It wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a puzzle, a secret that Father Alaric had hinted at, a buried truth. I started paying closer attention. I noticed the small things, the way certain doors were always locked, even when no one was inside, the faint, almost imperceptible tremor in Father Bartholomew's hand when he spoke of the missing priests, the way the seminary library, usually open to all, was sometimes locked for days, even weeks after a disappearance. I began to explore the seminary in my off hours, slipping through service entrances, climbing dusty staircases that led to forgotten attics. I knew the layout of the place better than anyone, every creaking floorboard, every loose stone. I was a ghost in the shadows, a small, unnoticed observer. My curiosity, as Father Alaric had warned, was a dangerous thing. But it was also a burning fire within me, pushing me to uncover the truth. 17 priests, 17 lives. They couldn't just vanish into thin air, not without a reason. And I, Finn, the altar boy, was determined to find it. The shadow of Sacred Heart had fallen, and I was about to step into its deepest, darkest corners. The chill that clung to Sacred Heart Seminary wasn't just from the old stone. It was the cold hand of a mystery, tightening its grip with each passing day. Father Alaric's words, what they wish to keep buried, echoed in my mind like the distant chimes of the bell tower. They were a challenge, a whisper in the dark, and I, Finn, the altar boy, was not one to back down from a puzzle. My routine at the seminary became a cover for my true mission. I still polished the brass, swept the chapel, and ran errands, but now every chore was an opportunity to observe, to listen, to search. I learned to move like a shadow, my worn shoes silent on the flagstones, my small frame blending into the perpetual dimness of the corridors. I noticed the subtle shifts in the priest's moods, the forced cheerfulness of Father Gregory, the nervous tics of Father Paul, the way Father Rector Bartholomew's eyes would dart around the room when the topic of the missing priests arose. It was like watching a play where everyone knew their lines, but some of the actors were clearly terrified of the script. My focus quickly turned to the seminary library. Father Alaric's hint about it being locked after disappearances stuck with me. It was a vast, sprawling room filled with ancient tomes that smelled of dust and forgotten knowledge. Usually it was open to all the priests, a place for study and contemplation, but after Father Michael vanished, it had been locked for nearly a week. I tried the handle every day, casually, as if just passing by. One afternoon it was unlocked. Slipped inside, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The air was heavy, still, as if no one had breathed it in days. Sunlight, filtered through the high, arched windows, illuminated motes of dust dancing in the air. The shelves stretched to the ceiling, crammed with Latin texts, theological treatises, and philosophical works. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I had a feeling. A hunch. I started at Father Michael's usual study carrel, a small wooden desk tucked away in a quiet corner. It was tidy, almost too tidy, Everything was in its place, as if he'd simply stepped away for a moment. But then I noticed it. A faint, almost invisible indentation on the dusty surface of the desk. It looked like something had been pressed down, hard, repeatedly. I leaned closer, tracing the mark with my finger. It wasn't a scratch from a pen or a coffee cup ring. It was a series of small, circular indentations, arranged in a pattern, like a code. My mind raced. Could Father Michael have been working on something secret? Something he didn't want anyone to find? I thought about the books he usually read, the ones he'd sometimes lend me. He liked history, old maps, and stories of ancient civilizations. I scanned the shelves around his carrel, looking for anything out of place. Most of the books were massive, leather-bound volumes, centuries old. Then I saw it. A small, unassuming book, its spine a faded brown, tucked between two much larger theological texts. It was a book on ancient symbols and forgotten languages. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but its cover, unlike the dusty spines, around it was strangely clean. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling. I opened it carefully, the pages brittle with age. I flipped through, looking for anything that matched the pattern on the desk, and there it was, on a page detailing obscure alchemical symbols, a series of interlocking circles, almost identical to the indentation. Below it, a single word, translated from Latin, threshold. Threshold. What did that mean? A doorway? A beginning? A point of no return? My mind buzzed with possibilities. This was more than just a random mark. It was a deliberate clue. Father Michael hadn't just vanished. He had left a message. But for whom? And why? I quickly replaced the book, making sure it looked exactly as it had before. I didn't want anyone to know I'd found it, especially not Father Rector Bartholomew. His rigid demeanor, his insistence on the higher service explanation, suddenly felt less like conviction and more like a desperate attempt to control a narrative. He was hiding something big. Over the next few days, I continued my quiet investigation. I revisited the library, studying the indentation on the desk, trying to commit the symbol to memory. I also started paying closer attention to the layout of the seminary. It was a sprawling, complex building with numerous wings and annexes. I knew the main areas, of course, but there were parts that were rarely used. Forgotten corners, locked doors. I remembered Father Alaric's words, the silence, and the whispers it tries to hide. I began to explore these forgotten parts. The old laundry rooms in the basement, long abandoned. The dusty attics filled with broken furniture and cobwebs. I found hidden staircases, narrow and winding, that led to unexpected places. A small, unused chapel, a disused bell tower. I was looking for anything unusual, anything that didn't fit. And then, in the deepest part of the seminary's ancient crypt, a place usually reserved for the burial of past rectors, I found something. The crypt was cold, damp, and smelled of earth and decay. I had only been allowed in there a few times, for special ceremonies. But I knew there was a section behind a heavy iron-bound door that was always locked. No one ever went in there. It was said to be where the very first rectors were buried centuries ago. Using a skeleton key I'd borrowed from the head sacristan's ring, a risky move, but one I felt compelled to make, I managed to open the door. Inside, it was even colder, the air thick with the scent of stagnant air and something else, something metallic. The room was small, circular, with rough-hewn stone walls. In the center, there was no coffin, no tomb. Instead, there was a large flat stone slab, covered in a thick layer of dust, and etched into its surface, faint but unmistakable, was the same symbol I had seen on Father Michael's desk, the interlocking circles, the threshold. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a symbol, it was a location, a secret place within the seminary itself, and it was here, in this hidden chamber, that the mystery of the 17 vanished priests began to truly unravel. The silence of Sacred Heart was not empty. It was filled with unspoken truths waiting to be discovered. And I, Finn, the altar boy, had just found the first chilling clue. The shadow of Sacred Heart was about to reveal its true form. The cold, metallic tang in the air of the hidden crypt, coupled with the sight of the threshold symbol etched into the stone slab, sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the damp. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat, in the profound silence. This wasn't just a symbol on a dusty book or a faint indentation on a desk. This was real. This was a place, a secret place, hidden deep within the very foundations of Sacred Heart Seminary. And it was connected to Father, Michael, and, I now suspected, to all 17 missing priests. My breath hitched in my throat, a small cloud of vapor in the frigid air. The silence of the crypt, usually just an absence of sound, now felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken truths. I reached out a trembling hand, my fingers hovering just above the carved lines of the threshold. It felt ancient, imbued with a power I couldn't comprehend. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a mystery I was observing, I was standing at its very heart. I forced myself to breathe, to calm the frantic thumping in my chest. Panic wouldn't help. I had to think. I looked around the small circular chamber. The rough-hewn stone walls offered no other obvious clues. No hidden doors, no flickering lights, just the oppressive weight of centuries of silence. The slab itself was flat, solid, seemingly immovable. I ran my hands over its surface, searching for seams, levers, anything that might suggest a mechanism. Nothing. It felt like a solid piece of the earth itself. The skeleton key, still clutched in my sweaty palm, felt suddenly heavy, a symbol of the forbidden knowledge I had just stumbled upon. I knew I couldn't linger. The head sacristan would eventually notice the missing key, or someone might come looking for me. I had to put it back. But leaving this place, leaving this chilling discovery, felt like abandoning a vital piece of the puzzle. With a final lingering glance at the threshold, I backed slowly out of the crypt, pulling the heavy iron-bound door shut behind me. The clang echoed through the damp corridor, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the dead silence. I quickly relocked the door, my fingers fumbling slightly, and then hurried back through the labyrinthine passages of the seminary's basement, my mind racing. The scent of dust and decay clung to my clothes, a phantom reminder of the secret I now carried. Back in the familiar, though still imposing main corridors, I tried to compose myself. I polished the key on my trousers, then slipped it back onto the sacristan's ring, which hung on a hook in his office. He was out for his evening meal, so I was safe for now. But the image of the threshold, etched into the stone, was burned into my mind. That night, sleep was impossible. My small cot in the servants' quarters felt too soft, too safe, compared to the cold, hard reality of the crypt. I kept seeing the symbol, hearing Father Alaric's raspy whisper, "What they wish to keep buried." And now, I knew where it was buried, over. The next few days, my investigation became more focused, more desperate. I needed to understand the threshold. I revisited the book on ancient symbols in the library, studying the page with the interlocking circles. The text spoke of it as a representation of liminal spaces, of transitions between worlds, of points of no return. It was often associated with ancient rites, with passages into the unknown, or with places where the veil between the living and the dead was thin. This chilling description only deepened the knot of dread in my stomach. Were the priests not gone to higher service, but gone through a threshold? I also started observing Father Alaric more closely. He was a man of routines, and his stoop and slow gait often made him seem harmless, easily overlooked. But I knew better. His eyes held centuries of secrets. I tried to catch him alone, to ask him more, but he seemed to sense my intent. He would offer a curt nod, a brief, knowing glance, but never an opportunity for a private word. He seemed to be warning me, subtly, through his silence. Don't push too hard, Finn. Some truths are best left undisturbed, but I couldn't leave it undisturbed. 17 priests, 17 lives. They were not just names in a ledger. They were men I had seen, men who had walked these very halls, men like Father Michael, who had given me biscuits and adventure stories. They deserved answers. I began to compile a mental list of the missing priests, trying to find a pattern. Father Alaric had said they were questioning. I remembered Father Thomas, who used to spend hours in the library poring over forbidden texts on ancient heresies. Father Joseph, who had a strange fascination with astronomy and the movements of celestial bodies, often sketching star charts in his notebook. Father Benedict, who was always asking philosophical questions that made the younger priests uncomfortable, questions about the nature of reality and the limits of human perception. They were all intellectuals, yes, but more than that, they were seekers. They were men who looked beyond the rigid dogma of the seminary, men who dared to ask why and the timing. The disappearances weren't random. There was always a period of intense study, a time when the missing priest would become particularly withdrawn, spending long hours in the library or in his private chambers. And then the library would be locked. And then they would be gone. It was a chillingly consistent pattern. My thoughts kept returning to the seminary's history. Was there anything in its past that could explain this? I knew the seminary had been built on ancient ground, a site rumored to have been sacred to earlier forgotten peoples. I tried to find old architectural plans, historical documents, anything that might shed light on the crypt's origins or any unusual features of the building. I spent hours in the public archives, pretending to research local history for a school project, but my eyes scanned for any mention of Sacred Heart, its construction, or any strange incidents. I found nothing explicit, no grand revelations. But I did find fragmented accounts, old newspaper clippings from the late 1800s mentioning unexplained phenomena in the region, strange lights in the sky, unusual animal behavior, and a few isolated reports of people simply vanishing from nearby farms. These were dismissed as superstition or the ramblings of uneducated folk, but reading them now, with the knowledge of the threshold, they sent a fresh wave of unease through me. Could the seminary be built on a place that was inherently unstable? A place where the veil was indeed thin? As my investigation deepened, I became more aware of the risks. Father Rector Bartholomew's eyes seemed to follow me more often. His questions, though seemingly innocuous, felt like veiled probes. "Are you finding everything in order, Finn? No unusual disturbances in the library?" His voice, usually booming, would drop to a low, almost menacing tone when he asked these questions. I knew he suspected something, though he couldn't possibly know what I had found. I had to be careful. One wrong move, and I might become the 18th disappearance. The weight of the secret grew heavier with each passing day. I couldn't tell anyone. Not Ma, who would worry herself sick. Not the other stable boys who would laugh or think I was mad. This was my burden, my quest. The more I thought about the threshold, the more I felt drawn back to it. The stone slab. It had to be more than just a symbol. It was a physical object. A door, perhaps? A portal? It was the only tangible link to the missing priests. I needed to go back. I needed to examine it more closely, to search for any hidden mechanisms, any subtle clues I might have missed in my initial panic. I needed to understand what lay beyond that threshold. The chilling truth of Sacred Heart Seminary was waiting, and I, Finn, the altar boy, was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. The shadows of the seminary were growing longer, and I was about to step even deeper into their terrifying embrace. The decision to return to the crypt weighed on me like a stone in my gut, heavy and cold. Every creak of the seminary floorboards, every distant chime of the bell tower seemed to amplify the silence of my secret. It was a gamble, certainly. If Father Rector Bartholomew caught me, or worse, if I encountered whatever force had claimed the 17 priests, my own disappearance would be just another whispered statistic. But the image of the threshold symbol, etched into that stone, slab, and the memory of Father Michael's kind smile gnawed at me. I had to know. I waited until the deepest part of the night when the seminary was truly asleep. The gas lights in the corridors were dimmed, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on my eyes. The air was colder, heavier, filled with the scent of old stone and lingering incense. I moved like a phantom, my bare feet silent on the cold flagstones, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knew every secret passage, every creaking step, every loose floorboard in that ancient building. It was my advantage, my cloak of invisibility. Reaching the basement, the air grew colder, damper. The smell of earth and decay was stronger here, a primal scent that spoke of things buried deep. I found the heavy iron-bound door to the hidden crypt. My hand trembled slightly as I inserted the skeleton key, the same one I'd borrowed from the sacristan. The lock turned with a soft, reluctant click that sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. I pushed the door open, slowly, cautiously, revealing the inky blackness within. A wave of frigid air washed over me, carrying that faint metallic tang I'd noticed before. I fumbled in my pocket for the small, stubby candle and matches I'd brought, my hands shaking slightly. The tiny flame flickered to life, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn stone walls of the circular chamber. And there it was, in the center, the flat stone slab with the threshold symbol etched into its surface. I approached it slowly, my eyes fixed on the symbol. It seemed to pulse faintly in the candlelight, an optical illusion perhaps, but it felt real. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic beat of my own heart. I knelt, running my fingers over the cold, smooth stone. It was incredibly dense, solid. I pressed down, pushed, pulled, searched for any seam, any lever, any hidden mechanism. Nothing. It was a single, monolithic piece of rock. But as my fingers traced the lines of the threshold, I noticed something. A subtle difference in the texture of the stone, right at the very edge of the slab, where it met the crypt floor. It wasn't a crack or a natural imperfection. It was a faint, almost imperceptible groove, no wider than my smallest finger, running along one side of the circular slab. It was too precise, too deliberate to be natural. I leaned closer, holding the candle low. The groove was shallow but distinct, and within it, almost invisible beneath a thin layer of dust, was something else. Something small, metallic. I carefully scraped away the dust with my fingernail, my breath held. It was a tiny silver crucifix, no bigger than my thumb, tarnished with age, but unmistakably a religious symbol. It was wedged tightly into the groove, as if it had been forced there, or had fallen and become lodged. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a random object. It was a personal crucifix, the kind priests wore on a chain around their necks or kept in their pockets, and it was lodged in the threshold. It felt like a desperate message, a final silent cry from someone who had passed through this very spot. I carefully, painstakingly, worked the crucifix free. It was cold in my palm, its silver dulled by time and the crypt's dampness. I recognized the style. It was very similar to the one Father Thomas, the priest who loved forbidden texts, used to wear. Could it be his? Had he been the one to leave it? A final, desperate attempt to mark his passage? The implications were chilling. This wasn't a higher service or a silent order. This was a forced passage, a vanishing into the unknown, and someone had tried to leave a clue. The crucifix felt like a tangible link to the horror that had unfolded here 17 times over. I looked at the groove again, now empty. It still seemed to hold a secret. I pressed my ear to the stone slab, listening. Nothing. Just the profound, echoing silence. But then, as I held my breath, I thought I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible hum, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to come from within the stone itself. It was so subtle, I almost dismissed it as my own imagination, a trick of the mind in the oppressive silence. But it was there, a deep, continuous thrum, like a giant, sleeping heart beating beneath the earth. It was the sound of the threshold, alive. My skin prickled with goosebumps. This was no ordinary stone. This was a gateway, a portal, humming with some unseen energy, and the crucifix, forced into its groove, was a desperate attempt to jam the lock, to leave a sign, to warn. I knew I had to leave. The longer I stayed, the greater the risk. I clutched the tiny crucifix in my hand, its cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of my palm. This was undeniable proof. Proof that the priests hadn't just gone, they had been taken, or had walked, into something terrifyingly unknown, leaving a desperate clue behind. As I slipped out of the crypt, carefully relocking the heavy door, I felt a new weight settle on my shoulders. It wasn't just the burden of a secret. It was the burden of a truth that was dangerous, that could shatter the very foundations of Sacred Heart Seminary, and perhaps the lives of everyone within it. The next morning, I moved through my chores like a phantom, my mind replaying the events of the night. I kept the crucifix hidden in my pocket, its cold weight a constant reminder. I noticed Father Rector Bartholomew watching me more closely than usual. His eyes, cold and calculating, seemed to linger, as if trying to pierce through my quiet facade. He asked me about the stable, about the supplies, his questions seemingly innocuous, but his gaze was sharp, suspicious. I answered simply, keeping my face impassive, my heart pounding. He knew I was looking for something. He just didn't know what. But I had something now. The crucifix, the hum, the threshold. It wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a dark, living thing hidden beneath the seminary. And I, Finn, the altar boy, was now inextricably linked to it. The shadows of Sacred Heart were deepening, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was stepping into a place far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The puzzle was becoming clearer, but the pieces were terrifying. The cold weight of the silver crucifix in my pocket was a constant, chilling reminder of the secret I now carried. It felt like a small, ancient key to a lock I barely understood, a tangible link to the horror that had unfolded 17 times beneath Sacred Heart Seminary. Every shadow seemed to lengthen. Every creak of the old building seemed to whisper Father Alaric's warning. Curiosity is a dangerous thing in these walls. But I couldn't unsee what I had seen, or unhear the faint, resonant hum that emanated from the threshold slab. My days became a meticulous performance of normalcy. I polished brass until it gleamed, swept floors until they shone, and ran errands with an exaggerated diligence. But beneath the surface, my mind was a frantic hive of activity, piecing together fragments, searching for patterns. Father Rector Bartholomew's eyes, cold and calculating, seemed to follow me more often. His questions, though seemingly innocuous, felt like veiled probes, designed to catch me off guard. "Are you finding everything in order, Finn?" "No unusual disturbances in the library?" he would ask, his voice dropping to a low, almost menacing tone. I would answer simply, keeping my face impassive, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He knew I was looking for something. He just didn't know what. Not yet. My thoughts kept returning to the hum. It wasn't a sound I could easily describe, a vibration more than an audible tone, deep and resonant like a giant sleeping heart beating beneath the earth. I spent hours in the seminary library, poring over ancient texts, searching for any mention of strange phenomena, of humming stones, of hidden passages or gateways. I looked at texts on geology, on ancient rites, on forgotten lore. Most of it was dense, incomprehensible Latin. But I was looking for keywords, for symbols, for anything that might resonate with the chilling reality of the crypt. I found obscure references to telluric currents and places of thin veil in dusty, forbidden volumes, texts that the seminary usually kept under lock and key. These were dismissed as pagan superstition in the footnotes, but to me they felt like tantalizing whispers of truth. I also tried, subtly, to glean more from Father Alaric. He was my only potential ally, the only one who seemed to acknowledge the deeper mystery. I would linger near him after Mass, or when he was tending his small herb garden behind the chapel. I'd ask seemingly innocent questions about the seminary's history, about the oldest parts of the building, about the stories passed down through generations of priests. He would offer a curt nod, a brief, knowing glance, but never an opportunity for a private word. He seemed to be warning me subtly through his silence. Don't push too hard, Finn. Some truths are best left undisturbed. His eyes, however, held a profound sorrow, a weariness that spoke of burdens too heavy to share. The tension in the seminary, already palpable, began to tighten further. It had been nearly 2 months since Father Michael's disappearance, and the priests were growing increasingly jumpy. Whispers of the curse circulated among the younger seminarians, hushed fears of becoming the next to vanish. Then a new pattern began to emerge, one that sent a fresh wave of dread through me. Father Gregory, a nervous, perpetually anxious young priest, began to exhibit strange behavior. He was a scholar, like many of the vanished priests, and he spent long hours in the library, often late into the night. I noticed him looking increasingly pale, his eyes wide and haunted. He would jump at sudden noises, and his hand would tremble when he held the chalice during Mass. One evening, as I was sweeping the main hall, I saw him emerge from the library, not through the main door, but through a small, rarely used service entrance that led directly to the basement. His face was ashen, his eyes darting, as if he had seen a ghost. He clutched a small, leather-bound book to his chest, its cover plain and unassuming. He didn't see me, lurking in the shadows. He hurried down the basement stairs, his footsteps echoing faintly in the silence. My heart pounded. The basement? The crypt? Was he going to the threshold? Was he the next to be called to higher service? I knew I had to act. I couldn't let another one vanish. I waited until Father Gregory's light in the basement library went out. Then I slipped down the stairs, moving with practiced stealth. The air in the basement was cold and damp, the silence oppressive. I crept towards the section where Father Gregory had disappeared. The service entrance was ajar, just slightly. I pushed it open, peering into the dimness. The basement library was empty. The chair at Father Gregory's usual table was pushed back, a half-empty mug of tea sitting beside a stack of books. But the small, leather-bound book he had been clutching was gone. My eyes scanned the area, searching for any clue. And then I saw it. On the dusty floor, near the table, was a single, small, and very unusual feather. It was iridescent, shimmering with a metallic green and blue, unlike any bird feather I had ever seen on the savannah. It felt alien, out of place in the dusty confines of the seminary. I carefully picked it up, my fingers brushing against its smooth, almost unnatural texture. It was beautiful, certainly, but also deeply unsettling. What kind of bird had such a feather? And how did it get into the seminary basement, especially in a place where Father Gregory had been studying just moments before? My mind immediately went to the alchemical symbols I had seen in the library book, the ones related to the threshold. I remembered a fleeting illustration on one of the pages, a stylized bird, its feathers shimmering with impossible colors, often associated with concepts of transformation or passage between realms. A cold dread settled in my stomach, the hum from the threshold, the missing priests, Father Gregory's terrified face, and now, this strange, iridescent feather. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a new piece of the puzzle, a terrifying link between the ancient symbol, the disappearances, and perhaps something even more unnatural. I quickly retreated from the basement, clutching the feather tightly in my hand. I knew I couldn't go back to the crypt that night. The risk was too great. But I had to understand what Father Gregory had been looking at, what secrets that small, leather-bound book held. And I had to find out what this feather meant. The next morning, Father Gregory was gone. His bed was empty, his personal effects neatly arranged, his cassock hanging in the wardrobe. Father Rector Bartholomew delivered his usual explanation at breakfast, his voice booming, but his eyes, when they met mine across the dining hall, held a new, chilling intensity. He knew. He didn't know what, but he knew I was closer to the truth than anyone else. I kept the iridescent feather hidden, a silent, shimmering testament to the chilling reality of Sacred Heart. The mystery of the 17 vanished priests was no longer just a puzzle. It was a living, breathing entity, its tendrils reaching out, drawing me deeper into its shadowy embrace. I, Finn, the altar boy, was now carrying the weight of a secret that could shatter the very foundations of the seminary, and perhaps the world as I knew it. The whispers of Sacred Heart were growing louder, and I knew with a chilling certainty that I was stepping into a place far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The puzzle was clearer, but the pieces were terrifying, and the next move was mine. The iridescent feather, shimmering with unnatural greens and blues in my palm, felt like a burning ember. It was a tangible piece of the impossible, a silent scream from the void that had swallowed Father Gregory and 16 others before him. My mind raced, connecting the feather to the alchemical symbols in the dusty library book, to the concept of transformation and passage between realms. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was a terrifying clue, a physical manifestation of the threshold's dark power. My days at Sacred Heart became a tightrope walk over an abyss. Every glance from Father Rector Bartholomew felt like a physical touch, cold and probing. He knew I was searching, though he couldn't possibly know what I had found. His questions, seemingly innocuous, were laced with a subtle menace. His eyes, cold and calculating, trying to pierce through my carefully constructed facade of an innocent altar boy. I answered simply, keeping my face impassive, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knew he was closer to the truth about my investigation than I was comfortable with. The weight of the secret grew heavier with each passing hour. I couldn't tell anyone. This was my burden, my quest, and my terrifying secret. My focus narrowed to Father Gregory's research. I knew he had been clutching a small, leather-bound book when I saw him emerge from the basement library. That book, and whatever notes he might have left behind, held the key. I began to spend every spare moment in the seminary library, specifically searching for any evidence of Father Gregory's recent studies. I looked for books that were out of place, for faint pencil marks in the margins, for any sign of his presence. After days of fruitless searching, I found it. Tucked away behind a row of oversized theological texts in a section rarely visited, was a small, unassuming volume on pre-Christian rituals in ancient Europe. Its cover was plain, its pages brittle, but its spine was slightly less dusty than the books around it. And inside, on the very last page, tucked into the binding, was a single, folded piece of paper. It was a note, written in Father Gregory's precise, hurried hand. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The note was a fragmented, desperate account, filled with cryptic references and chilling observations. Father Gregory had been investigating the disappearances just like me. He had found the threshold, he called it the gateway, and had been studying its nature. His notes spoke of a resonant frequency, a specific alignment of celestial bodies or perhaps even a particular sound that caused the threshold to hum, to activate. He believed the previous priests, drawn by their intellectual curiosity and their fascination with the unknown, had inadvertently stumbled upon this activation, or perhaps had even triggered it. The note also spoke of the iridescent feather. Father Gregory described it as a residue, a trace element, left behind by whatever entity or force passed through the gateway. He theorized it was a byproduct of the energy, a physical manifestation, of the dimensional shift. He believed it was a warning, a sign that the gateway was becoming increasingly unstable, its activations more frequent, its pull stronger. But the most terrifying part of the note was his final entry, scrawled hastily, almost illegibly. The next alignment, imminent. The hum, growing. It calls. I must understand, must stop it. The veil, thin. Tonight. The bell, at midnight. The true bell. My mind flashed to the seminary's bell tower, its massive bronze bell that chimed the hours. But there was another bell, a smaller, ancient one, housed in a disused section of the tower, rarely rung, only for the most solemn forgotten rites. Could that be it? Could the ringing of that specific bell at midnight be the trigger? A cold dread washed over me, a certainty that made my blood run cold. Father Gregory had gone to the threshold, not just to observe, but to stop it. And he had failed. He was the 18th. And the note, his final desperate message, was a warning. A warning for me. The threshold was not just a mystery, it was a ticking clock, and tonight at midnight it would open again. I had to stop it. I had to understand what lay beyond that terrifying hum. The weight of Father Gregory's note clutched in my hand felt heavier than any burden I had ever carried. Tonight, the bell, at midnight. The true bell. The words echoed in my mind, a chilling prophecy. I had to act, and fast. The seminary, usually a place of quiet contemplation, now felt like a stage set for a terrifying, unseen drama. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every distant sound a hidden meaning. My first instinct was to find Father Alaric. He was the only one who seemed to possess any understanding of the seminary's darker truths. I sought him out after evening. Prayers, trying to catch him alone in the dimly lit refectory. He was sipping a cup of thin broth, his ancient eyes clouded with their usual sorrow. "Father Alaric," I whispered, my voice urgent. I found something. About Father Gregory. And the others." I pulled the iridescent feather from my pocket, its unnatural shimmer catching the faint light. "And this. It's from the crypt. From the threshold." Father Alaric's hand holding his spoon froze. His eyes, usually distant, sharpened, focusing on the feather with an intensity that startled me. He glanced around the empty refectory, then leaned closer, his voice a raspy whisper. "You found it, Finn. I knew you would. Curiosity, as I warned, is a dangerous companion." He looked at the feather, then at me, a profound weariness in his gaze. "The feather, it is a sign of the veil thinning, of the other side reaching through." "What is it, Father? The threshold? Where do they go?" I pressed, my voice barely audible. He sighed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "A place not meant for mortal eyes, Finn. A place of impossible geometries, of energies that consume the soul. The seminary was built on a confluence of ancient ley lines, a place where the barrier between our world and another is weak. the founders. They sought to harness it, to draw divine power. But they opened a door they could not close. He paused, his eyes filled with a terrible sadness. The priests, they were drawn to it. The seekers, the questioners, they believed it was a path to enlightenment, to a deeper understanding of God's creation. But it is a path to oblivion. And the bell? I asked, my voice trembling. Father Gregory wrote about the true bell at midnight. Father Alaric's eyes widened, a flicker of fear in their depths. The ancient bell. The bell of lamentations. It was meant to seal the gateway, to reinforce the veil, but its true purpose was corrupted. It became a key, a resonant frequency, as your Father Gregory discovered. It draws them in. It opens the way. He gripped my arm, his gnarled fingers surprisingly strong. You must not go there, Finn. You must not ring that bell. You must not interfere. This is not a human fight. But Father Gregory went, I protested, pulling away. He tried to stop it, and he vanished, Finn, Father Alaric hissed, his voice rising, then quickly dropping back to a whisper, just as the others did. The gateway consumes. It does not release. You are a boy, Finn. This is beyond you. He then stood abruptly, his moment of openness gone, replaced by his usual stoic demeanor. He walked away, leaving me alone with the chilling words and the heavy weight of the feather. He had confirmed my fears but offered no solution, only a dire warning. I knew I was being watched. Father Bartholomew's presence felt like a constant shadow. He seemed to know I had spoken with Father Alaric. His eyes, when they met mine, held, a new, almost predatory glint. I was a loose end, a dangerous variable in his carefully constructed silence. I had to move before he did. The bell of lamentations. The true bell. Midnight. The words hammered in my mind. Father Alaric had told me not to go, but I couldn't just stand by. Not after Father Michael, not after Father Gregory. I had to try. I had to understand what lay beyond that terrifying hum. I had to find a way to stop it, or at least to leave a final, undeniable clue for the outside world. As the hours crawled by, the seminary grew quiet. The last lights flickered out. I gathered my meager supplies, a stronger candle, a small hammer I'd borrowed from the stable, and the silver crucifix Father Thomas had left. It was a desperate plan, born of fear and a fierce determination. I would go to the bell tower, to the bell of lamentations. I would go to the crypt, to the threshold, and I would face whatever lay beyond.